In the previous lesson, we talked about software supply chain attacks and how malicious code gets injected into trusted applications. Now we're going to talk more about another critical supply chain attack vector, MSP compromises, or managed service provider compromises. MSPs are companies that provide IT services, monitoring, management, and support to organizations that can't afford or don't want to maintain their own full IT departments. They are an attractive target for attackers because compromising one MSP provides access to potentially hundreds of customer organizations simultaneously. MSPs provide a range of IT services that require privileged access to customer systems. They remotely monitor networks and systems for problems and performance issues. They patch and update systems to keep them secure and functional. They provide help desk support responding to IT issues. They manage backups and disaster recovery. They maintain security tools and respond to alerts. They configure and manage cloud services and applications. All of these services require the MSP to have administrative access to customer networks, systems, and data. They need credentials that allow them to make changes, install software, and access sensitive information. This privileged access is granted because it's necessary for the MSP to do their job, but it also creates enormous security implications if the MSP is compromised. From an attacker's perspective, MSPs are extremely high-value targets. One successful MSP compromise provides access to many customer organizations, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds. The attacker gets a one-to-many return on their effort. MSPs have legitimate authorized access that bypasses many security controls. Their connections to customer networks are expected and trusted. Their activities don't trigger the same alerts that unauthorized access would. Small and medium businesses often use MSPs precisely because they lack internal security expertise and resources. These customers have less capability to detect compromises and respond effectively. MSPs often have access to multiple clients in the same industry or geographic region, making them valuable targets for attackers with specific interests in those sectors. There's a fundamental paradox in MSP relationships. Organizations use MSPs partly to improve their security, getting professional expertise they couldn't afford to hire internally, or they've chosen not to budget for, having 24/7 monitoring they couldn't provide themselves, and benefiting from security tools and processes they couldn't implement alone. But that same MSP relationship creates new risks. The MSP becomes a single point of failure. If the MSP has weak security, all their clients inherit that vulnerability. The MSP creates an attractive target that concentrates risk. Organizations using MSPs for security might actually be less secure if the MSP doesn't maintain better security than the client would have had independently. And if you have no security experts in your organization and are relying entirely on the MSP for their security expertise, then no one in your organization knows if you have a good MSP for security. You cannot judge what you do not understand. MSP business models create economic pressures that can compromise security. MSPs typically charge per client, per device, or per user, creating incentive to serve many clients with minimal staffing. They compete on price, creating pressure to minimize costs, including security investments. They need rapid client onboarding to grow revenue, which can lead to rushed security configurations and insufficient vetting of client environments. They handle sensitive data and systems for many clients, but might not have the security budget of larger enterprises. They're small to medium businesses themselves, often lacking dedicated security teams. These business pressures don't excuse weak security, but they help explain why some MSPs don't implement security adequate to the trust placed in them. Attackers use various methods to compromise MSPs. Phishing campaigns targeting MSP employees. Because MSP credentials provide access to many clients, they're particularly valuable and worth investments in targeted phishing. Exploiting vulnerabilities in remote monitoring and management RMM tools that MSPs use. These tools have high privileges and network reach, making them attractive targets. Credential theft through malware, keyloggers, or purchased breached credentials on underground markets. MSP credentials appear in breach databases like any other organization's credentials. Brute forcing weak passwords on MSP VPN or RMM systems. Some MSPs don't implement strong password requirements or multi-factor authentication. Supply chain attacks against the RMM software vendors themselves, compromising the tools that MSPs use to manage clients. Remote monitoring and management tools, RMM tools, are central to MSP operations and create significant security implications. These tools allow MSPs to remotely access client systems, deploy software, run scripts, monitor activity, and perform administrative functions. They're designed for convenience and comprehensive access. If an attacker compromises RMM tools or credentials, they inherit all that access and capability. They can access any client system the MSP manages, deploy malware organization-wide, steal data from multiple clients, and operate with administrative privileges. Several major ransomware campaigns have specifically exploited compromised RMM tools to deploy ransomware to multiple MSP clients simultaneously. The Kaseya VSA attack in 2021 illustrates MSP supply chain risk. Attackers compromised Kaseya VSA, a widely used RMM platform. They used this access to deploy ransomware through MSPs to their clients. Approximately 60 MSPs were directly affected, and through them, around 1,500 downstream businesses were hit with ransomware. The attack demonstrated the cascading effect of MSP compromise. One vendor compromised, then MSPs using that vendor compromised, then all those MSPs' clients compromised. The attack happened over a holiday weekend, when MSPs and clients had reduced staffing, maximizing the time before effective response could begin. There's a relevant concept from economics called moral hazard. The economist Paul Krugman explained it this way. Moral hazard arises when someone takes risks because they believe they won't bear the full consequences of those risks. Moral hazard applies to MSP security relationships in an interesting way. MSPs make security decisions that create risk, but their clients bear much of the consequences if those decisions lead to compromise. If an MSP implements weak security to save costs and gets compromised, the MSP faces reputational damage and potential liability, but their clients face operational disruption, data theft, ransom payments, and all the cascading consequences of breach. The MSP's incentive to invest in security is somewhat misaligned with the actual risk distribution. They bear some consequences, but the clients bear much of the impact. This doesn't mean MSPs are deliberately negligent. Most try to provide good services and security, but the economic structure creates imperfect incentives that can lead to underinvestment in security relative to the risks clients face. Organizations using MSPs often have limited visibility into MSP security practices. They might review security questionnaires and certifications, but these provide only surface-level assurance. They typically can't audit MSP security controls directly. They don't know what other clients the MSP serves or what access patterns look like. They trust that the MSP maintains good security because they must. They've granted the MSP extensive access and depend on them for critical services, but they can't independently verify that trust is warranted. This information asymmetry means clients might not know they're at risk until a compromise occurs. When attackers compromise an MSP, they can potentially move laterally between different client environments. If the MSP uses the same credentials across multiple clients, compromising those credentials provides access to all those clients. If the MSP's network connects to multiple client networks, attackers can pivot between them. This means that being an MSP client creates risk not just from the MSP's security, but from the security of all the MSP's other clients. If one client has poor security and gets compromised, and the attacker moves from that client into the MSP environment, all other clients then become vulnerable. These multi-client attacks can spread rapidly through MSP infrastructure, affecting many organizations before detection. MSPs must manage thousands of credentials for hundreds or thousands of systems across dozens of clients. Credential sprawl creates security challenges. Using the same credentials across clients creates cascade risk. Using unique credentials for every system creates management complexity. Storing all these credentials requires secure credential management systems that themselves become high-value targets. MSPs that don't implement robust credential management using privileged access management solutions, enforcing multi-factor authentication, rotating credentials regularly, and monitoring credential usage create vulnerabilities that attackers reliably find and exploit. Several major ransomware campaigns have specifically leveraged compromised MSP access. The attackers compromised the MSP's RMM tools or credentials. They use that access to deploy ransomware simultaneously to multiple MSP clients. Because the deployment comes through the MSP's legitimate administrative access, it bypasses many security controls. The REvil ransomware group targeted MSPs specifically and successfully executed multiple campaigns, deploying ransomware to many organizations through compromised MSPs. This tactic is effective because it provides scale. One MSP compromise affects many victims, and because it exploits trust relationships that make detection difficult. Detecting malicious activity from compromised MSPs is challenging because MSP access is expected and legitimate. Distinguishing between legitimate MSP activity and attacker activity using compromised MSP access requires understanding normal MSP behaviors and detecting deviations. Many organizations don't have this visibility or monitoring capability. By the time malicious activity becomes obvious, such as ransomware deployment, the attacker has already achieved their objectives. Forward-thinking organizations include security requirements in MSP contracts. Specific security standards the MSP must maintain: multi-factor authentication, encryption, logging, monitoring, incident notification obligations requiring the MSP to promptly disclose security incidents, audit rights allowing clients to verify MSP security controls, insurance requirements mandating adequate cyber insurance coverage, data handling requirements specifying how client data must be protected. These contractual provisions help, but don't eliminate risk. Contract terms only matter if they're enforced, and enforcement during crises is difficult. Various certifications and compliance frameworks attempt to provide assurance about MSP security. SOC 2 attestations provide some verifications of security controls. ISO 27001 certification demonstrates security management systems. Industry-specific certifications like HIPAA compliance for healthcare data. These certifications provide more assurance than nothing, but they're not guarantees. They verify controls existed at a point in time, not that they remain effective ongoing. They don't eliminate compromise risk. Organizations should view certifications as minimum baselines, not comprehensive assurance. Even with trusted MSPs, security best practice suggests implementing controls that limit MSP access. Network segmentation that restricts what MSP access can reach. Privilege minimization, granting MSPs only the necessary access for their specific services. Time-based access controls that limit when MSP access is valid. Just-in-time privileged access requiring approval for sensitive operations. These controls add friction and complexity to MSP relationships. MSPs might resist them because they make their work harder, but they provide defense in depth if the MSP is compromised. Organizations should monitor MSP access and activity even though it's expected and legitimate. Log all MSP connections and actions. Alert on unusual patterns like access at odd hours, access to unusual systems, or bulk data transfer. Review MSP activity regularly for anomalies. Require MSP personnel to use individual accounts rather than shared credentials so activity can be attributed. As MSP industry consolidates, with larger MSPs acquiring smaller ones, concentration risks increase. Larger MSPs serve more clients, making them even more more attractive targets. A successful compromise affects more victims. The blast radius of MSP security incidents grows. At the same time, larger MSPs might have more security resources and expertise than small MSPs. Consolidation might improve security or concentrate risk depending on whether the larger organization's security scales effectively with their increased client base. Organizations using MSPs can take steps to reduce risk, though they cannot eliminate it. Recognize that using an MSP creates dependency and risk that requires active management, technical controls limiting access, monitoring, security practice evaluation, incident response plans. Passive trust puts you at even greater risk. So you come to understand there is a vulnerability that's inherent to the MSP model rather than fixable through better practices alone. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about open source and dependency chain attacks more.